second most populated nation on Earth, will soon have 1 billion people. On the great continent of Asia, south of China and the Soviet Union, lies India, most of it a vast peninsula, known as the subcontinent. Although India is one large nation, within this nation there are many different regions with different customs, languages, and religions. One of India's most difficult problems is to convince these different people that they are part of one nation and must accept each other's differences if India is to continue its progress as a modern nation. To understand India's people and their culture, we must first look into their past. Along great rivers here started one of the oldest civilizations on Earth. More than 4,000 years ago, they built large cities here. Most houses had water wells, some built up to the second and third floors. They had river ports and busy marketplaces, with nearby industries making products of pottery and even of metal. They developed a system of writing and a religion that may have been the beginning of India's main religion, Hinduism. Century after century, this land was fought over by invaders from other regions, each invader bringing different ideas and customs. It was the Hindu religion that remained the strongest, but other religions also developed in India. About 2,500 years ago, a Hindu prince left his father's palace. He met with some holy men in this grove of trees to discuss his ideas about life. He preached his first sermon under this tree's ancestor, and he became known as Gautama Buddha, founder of the Buddhist religion. Today, Buddhism continues as one of the world's major religions. But it is Hinduism that has remained as one of India's most important religions. Hinduism is not only a spiritual religion, but also directs its people's daily lives, their occupations, the food they eat, clothing styles, who they can marry, and their family responsibilities. Each Hindu is born into a caste group that cannot be changed in this life. In other ways, Hinduism has been a tolerant religion that accepted and blended with ideas from other religions until the 16th century, when most of the Indian subcontinent was invaded and conquered by Muslim armies from Afghanistan, Turkey, perhaps even Arabia. The Muslims ruled for 300 years, but their religion was so different that it never blended with Hinduism. The Muslims brought new ideas in literature, mathematics, and especially architecture. Their palaces, forts, and tombs are colossal monuments of beauty, the most famous being the Taj Mahal, tomb for an empress. The Muslim rulers finally lost their power when the British gained control of the subcontinent. The British wanted to rule India to get its raw materials and cheap labor, and then sell back to the Indians Britain's manufactured products. The British brought European ideas of business and government administration. Much of this was to benefit themselves. This man, Mahatma Gandhi, encouraged the Indian people to have a non-violent revolution against British rule, even to throwing away British products such as cloth. Gandhi hoped that all Indians would unite to create one nation, but this was not to be. When India finally won independence, there was much religious violence. and the subcontinent was split into three parts: West Pakistan and East Pakistan for the Muslims, and Hindu India in the middle. However, many Muslims did not go to Pakistan. They remained in India. The nation was no longer a British colony. It had become the world's largest democracy. For the first time, people here could vote for their own government. But all the old problems remained. The new government had to help raise living standards. It had to provide sewage, medical care, education, and safe water supplies. It had to help build new industries and increase job opportunities. But most important of all, the government has had to improve farming conditions. India was, and still is, an agricultural nation. About 1 out of every 5 people living on Earth live in India, all of them depending on these farms for their food. Each region of India has different soils, different rainfall or water available, and different temperatures. Therefore, each region may grow different crops. Northern India is a region with the highest mountains in the world, the Himalayas. On these mountainsides, the forests supply much of India's lumber. The rocky hillsides are useful only for grazing sheep and goats. These animals are raised for their milk, their wool, and as the main source of meat for these mountain people. Every spring, the families move up into the higher valleys with all their belongings. And before winter snows, they migrate back down again. For many centuries, migrating families, trading caravans, and conquering armies have been passing through these valleys. Streams that cut through these mountains form some of India's main rivers. As the rivers reach wide valleys, they slow down, spread out, and form lakes. Each dawn on this lake in Kashmir, farmers bring their vegetables to market. From here, they will be taken to village and town markets to be sold again. From the Himalayan mountains, dozens of rivers flow southward, draining most of northern India, and then joining with India's most important river, the holy Ganges. This river is the life force for millions of people, supplying water for their homes, industries, and their farms. With water for irrigation in this warm climate, some farms can grow crops almost all year. Irrigation systems built by the government have helped the Punjab district to develop the richest farms in all India. But many farms in India do not have irrigation water. They must depend entirely on seasonal rains. Each year, India has 2 rainy seasons brought by monsoon winds. If the monsoons bring enough rain, the crops will be good. Without a good monsoon, there will be drought, crop failures, even starvation. This is sugarcane being harvested. Some villages have their own small homemade sugar refineries. Here they crush the stalks to get out the sweet juice. The stalks are then dried and used for fuel. Over the fire, large pans of cane juice are boiled until it thickens and becomes raw sugar. After cooling, the lumps of raw sugar will be carted to village markets or trucked to the city. There are several main cities in the Ganges region, such as Agra, Lucknow, Kanpur, and Allahabad. Now they seem rather similar to each other. Yet each one was important at one time or another in India's history, as homes of royalty, for battles fought, or as religious and cultural centers. Today, part of this Mughal palace is used for religious classes. Here, Muslim children are taught to read and write from their holy book, the Quran. One of the most important cities on the banks of the Ganges River is the holy city of Varanasi. Every morning at dawn, people come to the river to bathe and to pray. They bring their dead to these steps to be cremated in holy fire, and their ashes scattered into the holy Ganges River, to be carried hundreds of miles to the sea, and then to mingle with waters throughout the world. Along Varanasi's riverbanks and within the city, there are dozens of Hindu temples which attract religious pilgrims from all over India. And it was not far from here that Gautama Buddha preached his philosophy that became a religion. To the west of the Ganges River basin is a very different region, the hot desert of Rajasthan. Rajasthan has very little rainfall during the year, so for centuries, families here have been herders of goats and sheep rather than farmers. Some families have to travel several miles to get to water. At some wells, water may be 100 feet below the surface. A bucket is dropped into the deep well and then pulled back up to bring up the clear water. An entire village may depend on one well for their families and their animals. Some families are fortunate to be near irrigation canals. With irrigation water, the Rajasthan desert can be changed into excellent farmlands. On Rajasthan farms are grown most of the hot chili peppers sold throughout India. In Rajasthan's hot climate, school classes are often taught outdoors under shade of trees. Today, most boys in the countryside, and many girls, receive at least an elementary education. Over the past several centuries, the cities of Rajasthan have changed very little. Cities like Jodhpur, Jaipur, Bikaner, and Jaisalmer still have old forts and palaces of the Mughal and Rajput rulers. This fort above Jodhpur is preserved as a historical museum and cultural center. The city of Jodhpur still has much of its ancient charm for tourists, with its narrow, winding streets and many bazaars. Here, craftspeople dye yarn and cloth for others who weave or make clothing. Nearby, others use various hand techniques, such as block printing, to create designs on cloth. In this hot climate, most people prefer the cooler evenings to shop, to visit friends, and to work more hours to earn more money. The next streets are filled again with people on their way to work or to school. Education is greatly respected throughout India.
Capital M equal to 10.
Students realize that the more education they receive, the easier it will be for them to find jobs and to earn higher pay. Once these students have graduated and found jobs, they'll be ready for marriage. Getting married is not something that Hindus arrange for themselves. Their relatives have been looking, perhaps for years, for a suitable mate in the same caste. Led by musicians, relatives, and friends, the groom rides to the bride's house, accompanied by a young niece or nephew. Later, the bride and groom may go alone with one attendant to an old Hindu temple for special blessings. The bride remains veiled and is now symbolically attached to her husband with a length of silk. South of the dry Rajasthan region and the Ganges River basin lies the central region of India, separated from the coastal regions by low ranges of hills and mountains called the Eastern Ghats and the Western Ghats. Much of central India has rolling hills and gullies, sometimes rocky. The few rivers here have water only part of the year, not enough for irrigation. So most farms in central India must depend on the monsoon rains. Hindus are vegetarians. They eat no meat, but they grow many varieties of legumes, beans, peas, and lentils. These legumes provide much of the protein they eat. New varieties of grains have been developed for India's soils and weather conditions. These workers are turning over rice with their feet to dry in the sun. Another important crop in central India is cotton. From the cotton grown here, weaving mills can produce enough cloth for all of India's needs, as well as exporting some to other countries. Only about 1/4 of India's people live in cities, and even for many of them, life is about the same as traditional farm life. This river flows through the city of Hyderabad. When this region was ruled by the Mughals, they built great monuments, such as this arch in Hyderabad's bazaar. When India was divided, with part to become the Muslim nation of Pakistan, many Muslim families decided to remain in India. Today, 1 out of every 8 Indians is a Muslim. Behind these shops and down little alleyways, craftsmen make bangles, the bracelets worn by Indian women and girls. These bangles are made with colored glass, cut like jewels. Others are made of plastic, colored metals, and some even with silver and gold. The southern end of the Indian subcontinent is a tropical region. The air here is warmer. The rainfall is heavier. South India was less affected by invasions of conquerors, so their traditions have changed less, and their language remains different from the languages of northern India. Most people here are Hindu, and typical of Hindu areas, cows can safely roam the streets. Cows are considered sacred, not to be harmed, used only as work animals or to supply milk. The staple food of these people, and the main crop they grow, is rice. There's enough rain in these tropical valleys of southern India that rice can be grown almost all year round. Rice requires more hand labor than any other crop they can grow, but it produces their staple food, and any surplus they grow can then be sold. Not much modern machinery is in use in southern India. In these wet tropics, machinery may not always be as practical. Machinery is expensive, requires repairs, and uses imported fuels. While maintaining and fueling an elephant is much easier and cheaper. Along the seacoasts and in the bays of southern India, fishing is a major occupation. Here, large nets are being lowered to the bottom of the bay, left for a short time, and then quickly pulled up, with whatever fish happen to swim by. As each net's haul is brought ashore, the net is again lowered. While on the beach, crowds are waiting to buy the best seafood at as low a price as possible. This shrimp packing plant is near Cochin in southern India. Shiploads of large prawns are delivered here to be cleaned, selected for size, and packed for freezing. The packages of frozen shrimp will be sold to other nations. Most industries and factories of India are in and around its large cities. This steel mill is at Jamshedpur, not far from the great city of Calcutta. Both the iron ore and the coal they use to make steel is brought here from nearby mines. Steel from this mill is sent to factories all over India. When this nation first became independent, there were few factories here. The government had to build new ones to provide jobs and to make products needed by the people. The government still owns many factories, but more and more are now owned by large corporations or even wealthy families. Some businesses are into modern space-age programs for rockets, communication satellites, and nuclear energy. And most are using Indian-made computers. As new jobs open in modern technology, paying higher wages, a larger middle class of people is growing in India, families with a better standard of living. Much of India's industry is located in two of its largest cities, Calcutta and Bombay. Both are port cities, sending and receiving cargo from throughout the world. The port of Bombay is on the west coast of India. And directly across the nation, on the east coast, is the port city of Calcutta. Both cities have modern buildings with busy government, shopping, and business centers. Both have historical buildings left from the colonial days of British rule. Bombay and Calcutta are both educational centers. Their high schools and universities attract students from all regions of India.
Make sure it is dry.
Yet only about 4% of India's young people attend university, and they are, of course, of the upper classes. Both Bombay and Calcutta are extremely crowded cities, but Calcutta has the added problem of refugees, each one hoping to earn enough each day, at least for food. Thousands of these refugees poured into Calcutta after a war in nearby Bangladesh. Halfway between Calcutta and Bombay, in the heart of India, lies the capital city, New Delhi. New Delhi, like all large cities in the world, has its modern business district with high concrete office buildings and apartments. As living conditions improve in India, more foreign companies are opening offices here to take advantage of India's growing market and businesses. But most people here are still not affected by modern buildings and technology. Most people depend on bicycles, and most work is still done by hand laborers, even on modern high-rise buildings. In the older section of this capital city, some of the streets look like small towns and villages with peddlers, open shops, and bazaars. These people have come from the Himalayan mountain region to sell their handmade cloth on the sidewalks of the city. At a busy corner in the center of the city, hundreds of books are displayed. Most are in English. Language is a problem in India. There are about 16 major languages here, plus hundreds of dialects. Yet English, a foreign language, is the only one to be found throughout the country. Therefore, English is often used in business, in schools, and even in government. Daily life in India is slowly changing around these people, helping some, but bypassing many more. Their future will depend a lot on how they balance their traditional life against modern technological life. Now, one of India's most important tasks is to convince all its people, whatever their differences, in language, religion, or caste, that they are all Indians, all citizens of one democratic nation, India.